They were running.
From what?
But then a lot of nice things turn bad out there.
Usually, heroes are the ones facing off against the big bads in a comic universe because that's just how it mostly goes. Villains are so busy creating their own chaos, they don't tend to have their own enemies. Unless, of course, we're talking about a former villain turned anti-hero like Venom, the lethal protector himself. For the first part of his career, Venom had firmly embedded himself in Spider-Man's rogues gallery by doing everything he could do to bring down the web-slinger. When Venom first appeared over 36 years ago, he was Spider-Man's ultimate nemesis for being able to match Spidey pretty much power for power and also being given something of an advantage by being absolutely filled with plenty of raw hatred. But Venom's popularity and complex story arc have since transformed him, pushing him from supervillain to reluctant hero because after years of playing the bad guy, Eddie Brock had to eventually shift gears to embrace the anti-hero life. He's now fought alongside big names like the Guardians of the Galaxy and even served as an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. With so many years of tangled loyalties and fierce battles under his belt, Venom's racked up a huge roster of enemies that extend way beyond Peter Parker. I mean, a jet black suit of alien goop that turns you into a slobbering death machine? No wonder villains love this thing. Plus, the newly released Venom film has started a lot of conversation around the character. Because not all grand Venomies would make for the best screen adaptations, we've put together a list of the top 25 names in Venom's rogues gallery. So, without wasting another moment, let's get right to it. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. Now, this is a small clip for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Carnage. Only one villain can truly go toe-to-toe with Venom, and that is Cletus Cassidy, the twisted and deranged serial killer who became Carnage. Back in Eddie's early days as Venom, he found himself locked up alongside Cassidy, and when the Venom symbiote rejoined Eddie Brock in prison, it left behind an unexpected offspring without realizing it. Now, symbiotes reproduce asexually once per generation, but they don't typically have any attachment to their offspring. So Venom didn't think of cluing Eddie in, and his new symbiote ended up bonding with Cletus Cassidy by seeping into a cut on his skin and merging with his blood, which turned the new symbiote red and gave birth to Carnage. Once he escaped, Cassidy went on a killing spree, leaving the words Carnage rules scrawled in his blood at each crime scene. Since then, Eddie and Cletus have been locked in a brutal, never-ending war of bloodshed and symbiotic chaos, making Carnage Venom's most terrifying and relentless enemy. One of Carnage's most infamous comic appearances came in the 1993 SpiderMan event Maximum Carnage, where Carnage escapes from an asylum, brutally attacking doctors and freeing a supervillain named Shriek. The two quickly formed a twisted romantic bond and recruited a family of unhinged supervillains. Together, they launch a violent spree across New York, killing indiscriminately and plunging the city into chaos. At this point, the carnage was so extreme that it took an entire alliance between Spider-Man, Venom, Black Cat, Captain America, Nightwatch, Cloak and Dagger, Deathlock, Morbius and Firestar to bring the symbiote down. There's also the 2005 miniseries, Venom vs. Carnage, where Carnage becomes a father after his symbiote spawns a new offspring, even though he wants nothing to do with it. In fact, Carnage tried to kill the newborn symbiote immediately, but he was too exhausted after the brutal attempt to prevent its birth. Carnage was also a major villain in the Ultimate Spider-Man animated series, where an upgraded version of the Venom symbiote was originally created by the Green Goblin and later perfected by Hydra scientist Michael Morbius. Unlike Venom or AntiVenom, this new form of Carnage didn't need a host to wreak havoc and acted more like a symbiote bomb, capable of spreading itself across an entire city by releasing spores that infect anyone in range. Eventually, it found its ideal host in Mary Jane, who used its powers for good. Now, in Sony's Spider-Man universe, the Carnage symbiote is one of the main villains in Venom, Let There Be Carnage, alongside its host, Cletus Cassidy. This deadly symbiote bonded with the infamous serial killer to unleash chaos across San Francisco, making Carnage Venom's offspring and his archenemy. Starting at about 8 to 9 feet tall, Carnage even grows to a massive 15 feet during his showdown with Venom. Though Carnage meets his end in this film, the latest Venom: The Last Dance reveals that he managed to spawn another symbiote, Toxin, before being devoured by Venom. Toxin emerges to save Detective Mulligan during a fight at Grace Cathedral after he's nearly killed by Shriek. The symbiote bonds with Mulligan to keep him alive, shown when his eyes flash blue as he whispers, "Monsters."
Then a lot of nice things turn bad out there.
Null. Null first appeared in Thor: God of Thunder, although he was unnamed at the time and only seen briefly in the aftermath of a cosmic battle where he lay unconscious. His powerful weapon, the Necro Sword, ended up in the hands of Gore, and it was not until Venom issue 3 that Null was finally named and revealed himself as the creator of the symbiotes. Known as the God of the Symbiotes, Null stands as one of the Marvel Universe's most powerful villains, especially within the Venom series. This ancient, malevolent cosmic deity created the first symbiote, All Black, and later the entire symbiote race. With a relentless goal to spread darkness across the universe, Null seeked to conquer, destroy, and corrupt every life form he encountered, making him one of Eddie Brock's greatest enemies. Now, Null's existence dates back to before the universe itself, where he ruled over the Abyss. He claimed to be the embodiment of primordial darkness, although this darkness existed long before him. Initially, Null lay dormant in this vast void, content with the silence and stillness. But his peace was shattered when the Celestials arrived to create the universe and tried to recruit him as the King in Black to help maintain the multiverse from within. Furious at the invasion of his kingdom of darkness, Null rejected them and struck back by forging the All Black from his own shadow and shaping it into a sword powerful enough to decapitate the Celestials. Eventually, after being banished deeper into the void by the Celestials, Null found himself alongside the severed head of the Celestial he'd killed. He transformed this head into a forge and temporary base, refining his sword and infusing it with the Celestials' divine power, although this also unintentionally gave symbiotes their weaknesses to fire and sonic frequencies. Driven by rage against the divine light that had overrun his dark kingdom, Null crafted a symbiotic suit of armor from the eldritch darkness under his command and began a brutal campaign against the gods and all life itself by conquering the vast reaches of the cosmos. His relentless destruction and hatred made him a figure of terror among divine beings everywhere. Null also serves as the main antagonist in the Venom film trilogy within Sony's SpiderMan universe. He's a primordial Clintarian deity and elder god, recognized as the creator of the symbiotes. For most of his existence, Null has been on a relentless search for a key to free himself from his imprisonment. Before the universe came into being, Null ruled over a realm of pure darkness. However, when the universe of light emerged, it invaded his dark domain, prompting him to create the symbiotes as allies in his quest to destroy all life and light. Null conquered numerous planes, but ultimately his symbiotes betrayed him, imprisoning him within a spire throne in the dark world of Clintar. Even in captivity, Null retained immense power, which led the symbiotes to flee and take the Codex, which is the only means to break his prison. In Venom: The Last Dance, when Eddie and Venom returned to their universe, Null sensed the Codex's presence again. In response, he began creating portals to various habitable worlds, sending his xenophages out to hunt for the Codex. In an epic showdown, Venom expanded to cover xenophages and restrained them long enough to unleash a highly corrosive acid and explosives, obliterating the creatures. However, this act of self-sacrifice seemed to cost Venom his life. In the aftermath, Eddie Brock, along with 2 surviving scientists and a few military personnel, managed to survive the battle. While Venom's apparent death signaled the destruction of the Codex, Null declared that Earth was now in greater danger without its lethal protector. He planned to escape through other means and set in motion his King in Black scheme to exterminate all life, aiming to reclaim his dominion over a universe of darkness. Toxin. Like all symbiotes, Carnage found himself in a situation that he'd never anticipated, and, well, he was pregnant. However, instead of feeling joy, he was consumed by hatred and fear for his new son, worried that it could become even more powerful than him. Determined to eliminate his offspring as soon as it was born, Carnage quickly found that once the moment arrived, he was too weak to follow through with his plan. In a desperate attempt to rid himself of the spawn, he tried to blow it up and even attempted to bury it, but nothing worked. Ultimately, he decided to bond the symbiote spawn with an NYPD officer named Patrick Mulligan, hoping he could destroy the symbiote later when he'd regained his strength. Before everything unfolded, Patrick Mulligan was just a cop, living a normal life with his wife and son. Carnage actually bonded his child to Patrick during a gas leak explosion, planning to kill him afterward. Carnage did try to kill Toxin again, but he was stopped by Black Cat and later by Venom. Venom saw potential in the new symbiote and wanted to train it to become an ally, someone who could help him against Spider-Man and, if necessary, Carnage himself. During a fierce battle, Venom named the new symbiote Toxin because, well, unlike other symbiotes, he smelled like poison and had tendrils similar to Carnage's, but his body resembled Venom's. Considered to be the strongest of symbiotes beyond Venom and its father, Toxin evolved to be a vicious and vile symbiote who rivaled Venom's previous veracity. Before Eddie was forcibly bonded to Toxin by Crime Master, he actually battled Toxin multiple times before. In Sony's Spider-Man universe, Toxin was born during the intense battle between his father, Carnage, and grandfather, Venom, at Grace Cathedral. He eventually ended up bonding with Patrick Mulligan, ultimately saving his life after the officer was killed by Shriek. After that confrontation, Toxin chose to leave Patrick behind to evade Strickland's soldiers. Eventually, Patrick was captured by the US Armed Forces and imprisoned in Area 51, where he bonded with another symbiote. While Toxin managed to survive, his grandfather Venom seemingly sacrificed himself to save Eddie Brock, making Toxin the last surviving member of their family. However, Toxin's decision to abandon Mulligan did give off a selfish vibe, suggesting that he only cared about his own survival. It's important to consider, though, that Toxin's actions might simply reflect his youth and instinct to survive in a world where he feels hunted by threats. The Sin Eater. So, Stan Carter was born in Fort Meade, Maryland, and started his career as a SHIELD agent before moving on to the New York Police Department. During his time with SHIELD, he participated in an experimental program aimed at enhancing physical strength using antipsychotic medications like PCP. While the experiments did boost his physical abilities, they also had a dark side. They made Stan increasingly aggressive and violent. Eventually, SHIELD decided to shut down the program, deeming it too risky to continue, and Stan chose to resign from the organization, believing the drugs had fully left his system. He eventually rose to the rank of sergeant in the NYPD, where he crossed paths with Captain Jean DeWolff, and soon the two began a secret affair that nobody knew about. However, Stan's partner was killed in the line of duty, plunging him into a deep depression that led him to turn to alcohol. As he drank more, the lingering effects of the drugs resurfaced, and combined with his strong religious beliefs, they warped his mindset. He became convinced that it was his duty to purge what he saw as the sins of a corrupt society, which ultimately drove him to adopt the identity of the Sin Eater. Now, Sin Eater crossed paths with Venom when it later came to light that Emil Gregg, who posed as the Sin Eater, had given Eddie Brock a series of anonymous interviews under false pretenses. This was a turning point in Brock's career, the moment he believed would launch him to success. However, everything came crashing down when Spider-Man apprehended the real Sin Eater and Eddie was exposed as a fraud, leading to his resignation from the Daily Globe, the collapse of his marriage, and his father's disownment. The weight of these failures pushed Brock to contemplate suicide. In his despair, he found himself in a church praying for help when the symbiote came to him. It sensed Eddie's deep resentment towards Spider-Man for catching the real Sin Eater and resonated with that anger. In that moment, they merged to become Venom, bonded by their shared hatred for Spidey. It's often suggested that if it hadn't been for the Sin Eater incident, Venom might never have come into existence.
The suit! You gotta take it off!
Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you?
Spider-Man. Honestly, Spider-Man is not the usual choice for villains, given that he's known as New York's friendly neighborhood hero, swinging through the city to save the day. But his complicated history with Venom is hard to overlook. At first, Venom was just a symbiote that bonded with Peter Parker as the infamous Black Suit. Over time, however, the suit grew increasingly aggressive, pushing Peter to ultimately dump it. This left the alien symbiote looking for a new host, which led it to reporter Eddie Brock, who had accused a single person of being the Sin Eater. But when Spider-Man unmasked the real villain, it turned out to be someone completely different. This revelation left Brock feeling humiliated, cost him his job. In his anger, he bonded with the symbiote and transformed into Venom, launching a series of attacks on Peter's life, scaring even Mary Jane in the process. Following MJ's urging, Peter decided to stop wearing the black suit. Eventually, Venom's symbiote had an offspring that bonded with Cletus Cassidy, a psychopathic murderer, creating the terrifying Carnage. This forced Venom and Spider-Man to join forces to take down this new threat. In the end, Peter and Eddie reached an understanding, promising to stay out of each other's lives moving forward. So while Spider-Man isn't a villain in the traditional sense, you could argue that, well, from a certain perspective, he's played a role in creating one. But I think all of that is in the past, given that they both teamed up to take down evil time and again. Grindle. Grindle is a symbiote dragon who was created billions of years ago by Null, along with another crimson symbiote dragon formed from Null's blood. These two dragons were unleashed into the cosmos, where they wreaked havoc for eons, destroying pantheons of gods and driving countless civilizations to madness before consuming them. In the 6th century CE, the two symbiote dragons made their way to Earth and took up residence in a hidden cave behind a waterfall in Denmark. From there, they launched a brutal campaign to dominate the planet, destroying entire cities and devouring any wildlife and humans they encountered. Following their arrival, a cannibalistic cult emerged, worshipping the symbiote dragons and constructing grotesque monuments in their honor. Now, the black symbiote dragon who was controlled by Null was mistaken for the monstrous dark elf known as Grindle and began its assault on Heorot Hall. When Thor Odinson intervened, the Grindle attempted to kill him, but was struck by Thor's divine lightning and trapped in a glacier. This event became the basis for the legend of Beowulf slaying a dragon in Marvel. Old Norse carvings created by the cult revealed that pieces of the Grendel's living abyss fell to earth after its defeat, and these remnants bonded with human hosts to grant the cult knowledge of Null and the symbiotes. In the modern era, after taking over the defunct Sim Soldier program, Weapon Plus created the Weapon V Super Soldier program. They began using samples of the Grendel symbiote to develop advanced suits of symbiote bio-armor. Over time, they figured out how to break the suit's connection to the hive mind, allowing for greater control over the symbiote's powers. After S.H.I.E.L.D. fell apart, the Grendel and its offshoots were being transported to a secret location for disposal. However, Venom crashed the transport, awakening the Grendel, which was reclaimed by Null along with nearly all the offshoots taken by the Sim Soldier program. The Grendel then went on a rampage through Manhattan, shrugging off attempts by both the NYPD and the US Army to stop it. When Venom and SpiderMan confronted the creature, Grendel tried to swallow them whole and ended up swallowing Miles Morales as well. Inside the Grendel, Miles unleashed his bioelectric Venom blast, causing the creature to destabilize and collapse. Seizing the opportunity, Null used the living abyss of the Grendel to create an avatar for himself. After knocking Miles unconscious, Null reformed the Grendel around himself, Spider-Man, and Eddie Brock. He distracted Eddie by recounting the history of the symbiotes before taking off into space, determined to locate the missing pieces of the Grendel and use them to free himself from Clintar. After Venom merged with one of Grendel's missing pieces, the Tyrannosaurus symbiote, it connected to the hive mind and reached out to Null. The Grendel then attacked Rex's base, attempting to consume Venom once again. However, it was destabilized by the jury's sonic grenades. In the chaos, Null's manifestation tore the Venom and Tyrannosaurus symbiotes away from Eddie, trying to merge them with the Grendel. But Eddie had a plan. He detonated all the sonic grenades simultaneously. The explosion weakened Null's form, giving the Tyrannosaurus symbiote the chance to fight back. In a selfless move, it pulled Null into the blast furnace, sacrificing itself to incinerate the Grendel symbiote, seemingly ending Null's threat in the process. Bedum. Bedum is essentially a time-traveling version of Eddie Brock's Codex. After Eddie's second visit to Meridius' Garden of Time as Finnegan, he found himself back in the past, landing in Limbo, which is a dimension under the rule of the Goblin Queen, Madeline Pryor, who was a clone of Jean Grey. When Eddie met Madeline in person, she proposed a mutually beneficial alliance, offering to reunite him with his son, Dylan. Eddie's memories were forcibly ripped away by Chasm, a clone of Spider-Man who ironically wanted to absorb those memories for himself. This act pushed Eddie back into his old villainous mindset, making him believe he could help with an invasion of New York. After a brief fight with Spider-Man, during which he still saw himself as an enemy, Eddie was sent alongside Hallows' Eve to retrieve a Cerebro unit that contained a copy of Jean Grey's mind. During this mission, he faced off against Sync, an X-Man who could mimic the powers of his opponents. During their confrontation, Sync revealed to Eddie that he was now a king in black, and that he'd lost all his memories. Frightened and overwhelmed, Eddie fled, feeling defeated and blaming Spider-Man for his predicament, which was true, but it was a different Spider-Man. In that moment of turmoil, Venom's biomass shifted to red, and he himself made a transformation into Bedum, declaring his desire to reclaim the Venom symbiote. Dylan quickly reappeared, eager to pick up their previous fight. After being defeated and returning to the Garden of Time, Eddie found himself reliving that infamous moment when Bedum attacked Finnegan. But this time, he experienced it from Bedlam's perspective in his quest to kill Finnegan and erase himself, along with the other iterations, especially Meridius, from existence. However, Bedlam was interrupted by Meridius, who urged Bedlam to return to the present and confront Dylan again, but at an earlier point in time. He convinced Bedlam that enduring pain would make him stronger and better equipped to defeat Meridius in the future. So, Bedlam goes undercover and hitches a ride with a trucker to hunt down Venom. When Venom, now merged with Dylan, finally faces off against Bedlam, he realizes that his opponent is far more powerful than he anticipated. After what seems like a lethal encounter, Dylan believes he's killed Bedlam and heads off to stop a biker gang war. However, Bedlam isn't done yet. He revives, revealing that as a king in black, he can't truly die. He then overpowers Dylan, torturing him and exposing his true identity as Eddie Brock. This revelation hits Dylan hard, shattering him emotionally. In the meantime, a previous version of Eddie Brock travels back in time to save Dylan. He mistakenly enters Bedlam, initially thinking he's facing off against Carnage. As he realizes that Bedlam is actually a twisted version of himself, he's helpless to stop Dylan from dying at his hands. This might have been one of the most confusing Venom arcs yet, but if you give the comics a try, well, it'll surely end up to be quite an experience at the end. Deo Goblin. After repeatedly losing to Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, Jason Macendale Jr., known as the Hobgoblin, decided to take drastic measures. During the Inferno crisis, he tracked several demons back to their lair and boldly approached the demon lord, Nastir. Desperate for the power to finally defeat his enemies, Macendale offered his soul in exchange, and so Nastir honored Macendale's wish by having him possessed by a demon. This gave him the strength he craved, but it came at a cost. The bond was turbulent, and Macendale and the demon clashed constantly, each struggling to control their shared body. Ultimately, the demon broke free, becoming its own entity, Deo Goblin, leaving Macendale with an even deadlier adversary. Deo Goblin, driven by religious zealotry, wasn't motivated by personal gain, but rather by a relentless quest to kill anyone he saw as a sinner to achieve his own twisted redemption. His definition of a sinner was so extreme that almost no one escaped it. Because of his strict sense of justice, Deo Goblin frequently found himself battling Spider-Man, Ghost Rider, Venom, and even his former host, Macendale. But his end was kinda selfless. Deo Goblin began to reflect on his violent mission with growing doubt. Upon escaping once again, he sought out Macendale, hoping to reconcile and ask for forgiveness. Macendale, however, refused to believe in Deo Goblin's change of heart, and a fight broke out between them in a local church. In the heat of battle, Deo Goblin noticed a pillar about to fall on a mother and her son. In a rare moment of selflessness, he rushed to hold it up, giving them time to escape. But his strength failed him, and the pillar collapsed, crushing him beneath it. Scream. Donna Diego worked as part of the Life Foundation security team, a group dedicated to preparing for the fallout of a possible Cold War catastrophe. The organization aimed to ensure that their wealthy clients could enjoy a secure, comfortable life if a nuclear disaster occurred. Donna volunteered to bond with an alien symbiote that the Life Foundation forcibly extracted from Venom. Through this bonding, Donna transformed into Scream, becoming one of the Life Foundation's superhuman guardians. Initially, Scream used Donna's body for doing basic villain shit, and in the process, she became a deadly force. However, over time, Scream's character evolved, shifting from a ruthless killer to someone on a path toward redemption through various events in the comics. Although Donna was eventually killed by Eddie Brock, the Scream symbiote found new life, continuing its story in later issues. Shriek. Love can come in many strange ways. As time has worn on, the likes of Francis Barrison went from being a drug addict to a super-powered villain equipped with supersonic abilities. Now, Shriek had a painful childhood because of a troubled home life and the harsh judgment from her mother about her weight. As she got older, this unhappiness pushed her toward drugs, and she became involved in the music scene as a band groupie while dealing on the side. During one of her drug deals, she encountered the vigilantes Cloak and Dagger. Already deeply scarred from past traumas, a brief experience in Cloak's dark dimension drove her to complete insanity, and she was later confined to Ravencroft Institute. Shriek claims that she was also shot in the head by police, with doctors later piecing her skull back together, though she believes they might have missed something crucial. How she developed her powers remains a mystery, but they may have been latent abilities triggered by her exposure to Cloak's darkness, or possibly a side effect of her drug use, or even a combination of different factors that led to her transformation. Later, when Carnage managed to escape from Ravencroft, Shriek convinced him to take her along. Soon, they teamed up with Doppelganger, Deo Goblin, and Carrion. Shriek's fixation on family dynamics began to show, and she saw Carnage as her husband. Carrion and Deo Goblin became her children, to whom she'd pass on her dark ways. Doppelganger became their strange family pet. Carnage, being as unhinged as she was, simply embraced this chaotic version of her family. In Maximum Carnage, Shriek used her powers to amplify the darker urges in the people of New York, inciting chaos wherever they went. Spider-Man, along with allies like Black Cat, Iron Fist, and Venom, faced off against her and her Carnage family. Over time, Doppelganger grew attached to Shriek, and when Carnage attacked her for disobedience, Doppelganger sacrificed himself to protect Shriek. This internal chaos tore the Carnage family apart. With Doppelganger's death, Carrion seemingly cured, and Deo Goblin beginning to question his violent path, Shriek had a moment of clarity as well. After the dust settled, she was sent back to Ravencroft, but she broke out in the later comic issues to wreak havoc on Eddie and Venom. Meridius. So, Meridius is a future version of Eddie Brock, destined to become the King in Black. Over thousands of years, he's taken on several identities, and some of them are Eddie, Finnegan, Bedlam, Wild, and Tyro. He finally emerged as Meridius, which was his last form before becoming the Eventuality. However, like Null before him, Meridius rejects the idea of the King in Black's role as a cosmic guardian. Instead, he's obsessed with finding a way to escape his fate entirely. Through and through, Meridius is a rather important villain in the Marvel Universe. He was, in fact, the main antagonist in the 2021 Venom series and the Venom War event. So basically, he's a future version of Eddie Brock's Codex, trapped in a paradoxical time loop within the symbiote hive mind. In this cycle, Eddie goes through 5 different versions of himself before ultimately becoming Meridius. Driven by a deep resentment toward Eddie Brock and his previous forms, Meridius blames them for his predicament in the time loop and aims to corrupt the Venom symbiote to prevent himself from becoming the final iteration of Eddie, known as the Eventuality. As a King in Black, Meridius is a non-linear being who doesn't follow a sequential timeline, which means that he's capable of projecting his consciousness through time, allowing him to monitor and manipulate events across the time stream. Meridius can also project his will onto any symbiote's matter at any point in time or space. Through all his appearances, Meridius' main purpose has been to create ruckus for Venom, making sure to give Eddie hell every time he intervenes with anything that Meridius did. AntiVenom. After Eddie Brock parted ways with the Venom symbiote, some remnants of it lingered in his body. Later, while battling cancer, Eddie volunteered at the Feast Center, which was an organization founded by Martin Lee, who secretly operated as the supervillain, Mr. Negative. During a treatment session, Lee used his powers to cure Eddie's cancer. However, in the process, Lee unintentionally infused the leftover symbiote traces in Eddie's bloodstream with his own abilities, ultimately merging them with Eddie's white blood cells to create a new hybrid symbiote, which manifested when the Venom symbiote attempted to leave its then-host, Mac Gargan, and return to Eddie. Now Eddie named his new symbiote AntiVenom, which displayed incredible healing abilities, setting it apart from the original Venom. AntiVenom could generate antibodies that could cure virtually any disease and cleanse the human body of impurities. Unlike other symbiotes, AntiVenom was completely mindless, allowing Eddie to maintain full control over its actions. Unfortunately, Eddie sacrificed the AntiVenom symbiote suit, which met its end when it was used to develop a cure for the spider virus. Years later, Dr. Steven utilized elements of the AntiVenom symbiote to develop a new cure for the toxic shock syndrome caused by the Venom symbiote. This new serum was designed to adapt alongside Venom. When high concentrations of the serum were introduced to the Venom symbiote's biomass that was bonded to Flash Thompson, it led to the artificial recreation of the AntiVenom symbiote. However, when Flash was killed by the Red Goblin, the replica of AntiVenom perished with him. During Null's invasion of Earth, Flash's consciousness, which had been stored in the symbiote hive mind as a codex, managed to download itself into a symbiote dragon in the real world to combat the Dark God. Flash then located his own body in the graveyard and successfully merged with it, reviving himself. Craven the Hunter. Sergei Nikolaevich Kravinov, who's more commonly known as Craven the Hunter, is a prominent villain in the Marvel Universe, particularly within the SpiderMan franchise. Originally a Russian aristocrat, Craven is an exceptional big-game hunter who prides himself on his unmatched skills. He constantly seeks new and challenging prey to push himself to the limits. After discovering Spider-Man, Craven sort of became fixated on the idea of hunting and defeating him, viewing him as the ultimate challenge. Throughout the years, there have been a few shocking moments when he's been portrayed as an anti-hero or a neutral ally to Spider-Man, largely due to his strict code of honor. However, he often reverts to being a menacing threat to Spider-Man and other heroes. Interestingly, Craven is also the half-brother of the Chameleon, who is another popular Spider-Man villain, and he was one of the original members of Venom's Sinister Six. Craven the Hunter has been the main antagonist in significant story arcs like Craven's Last Hunt, Grim Hunt, and Hunted, among others. Basically, this dude was married to the idea of hunting. As one of Spider-Man's oldest and most persistent adversaries, he's also crossed paths with various other heroes, including Black Panther, Tigra, Kazar, Deadpool, Venom, and the X-Men. Red Goblin. So, Norman Osborn discovered Spider-Man's secret identity after torturing J. Jonah Jameson. Feeling guilty for inadvertently putting Spider-Man in danger, Jameson sought out Eddie Brock, hoping to recruit him for help. Of course, Venom agreed and rushed to Stark Tower to protect Mary Jane from the Red Goblin. Unfortunately, Red Goblin quickly gained the upper hand against Venom, who was then weakened by Stark Tower's anti-symbiote defenses. In a desperate move, Spider-Man then rebonded with the Venom symbiote to even out the odds, and together they managed to defeat Norman Osborn's Red Goblin persona. Riot. So Trevor was a volunteer and mercenary for Life Foundation, an organization focused on preparing for the fallout of the Cold War and ensuring a comfortable life for their wealthy clients in the aftermath of a potential nuclear holocaust. Chosen from a security force full of cops, soldiers, and mercenaries, Trevor participated in a risky experiment where the Venom symbiote was used to create multiple offspring. This led to the birth of Riot, a symbiote that bonded with Trevor. Unlike his siblings, Trevor was exceptionally aggressive and unsympathetic, displaying a sort of ruthlessness that was worse than Carnage. Clearly, Trevor struggled to control the alien symbiote inside him, which often led to violent outbursts. So, to gain control over their powers, he and the other Life Foundation symbiotes kidnapped Eddie Brock. While Eddie was busy defending San Francisco as Venom, Riot and his siblings faced off against him and SpiderMan. Ultimately, Trevor's symbiote was artificially aged to the point of dust, and during the chaos of their battle, Trevor's body was caught in a massive explosion. Later on, it was discovered that Riot and the other symbiotes had actually survived due to the Life Foundation's intervention, but they again broke out of prison to kidnap Eddie Brock one last time, hoping to reach out to their alien others. However, Eddie refused to help them, recalling how Carnage had turned his own children into ruthless killers. In a tragic turn of events, Scream, consumed by her schizophrenia and the influence of her symbiote, ended up killing Trevor with a sonic knife after also killing Leslie, who was Agony. Convinced that all symbiotes and their hosts were evil, Scream's actions created chaos within their ranks. Trevor's death further enabled Donna to manipulate the others into believing that Eddie Brock was hunting them down one by one. But Trevor's symbiote, Riot, managed to survive and ended up imprisoned again. Riot was experimented on in a facility known as the Vault, along with its siblings, except for Carnage and Scream. Over time, the symbiotes began to merge together and eventually bonded with a man named Scott Washington, creating a new entity known as Hybrid. Poisons. Poisons are a race of crystalline aliens in Marvel Comics. In their basic form, they're quite weak, but they can become significantly more powerful by assimilating symbiotes. This usually involves them impersonating a target's loved ones or ambushing them. Once they've successfully bonded with a symbiote, they gain its powers, abilities, memories, and even some personality traits. The host is consumed during this process, providing the necessary nutrients to fuel the bond. The poisons lived as prey to larger and stronger creatures for a long time, until they were discovered by a version of Stephen Strange, who was bonded with the Venom symbiote. He realized that the poisons could assimilate Clintar to boost their own power. In response, Strange assembled a resistance made up of venomized heroes and villains to fight back. However, most of these heroes and villains either ended up being killed or were forced to join the ranks of the Poisons. The Poisons, now led by one who had consumed Dr. Doom, devised a plan to capture Stephen Strange and use him to summon as many Venoms as possible for assimilation. However, they were largely unaware of the existence of stronger symbiotes like Carnage, who was summoned to help the Resistance as a secret weapon. During an intense battle, several Poisons were taken out when the Resistance, with the help of a poison but still called himself Deadpool, infiltrated their ship to rescue Strange and activated the self-destruct sequence. Meanwhile, Doom managed to escape and reported back to the true leader of the Hive, Poison Thanos, who had become aware of the multiverse and set his sights on conquering it. Poisons managed to infiltrate the Prime Marvel Universe, using a symbiote poacher to launch a raid on the planet Clintar. In this brutal attack, they wiped out the agents of the cosmos and captured every symbiote they could find. Afterward, they modified the symbiotes to make them easier to assimilate and began bonding them with superheroes across Earth. One of the Poisons had already assimilated Jean Grey, forcing her to merge with a symbiote against her will. Their plans also involved targeting anomalies like the mainstream Cletus Cassidy, Kid Kaiju, and Agent AntiVenom, aiming to either assimilate them or eliminate them entirely to further their conquest. The Poisons managed to capture Cletus Cassidy and forced him to bond with a different symbiote instead of Carnage, just before one of the Poisons could merge with him. Meanwhile, Agent AntiVenom proved to be immune to their assimilation attempts, as his symbiote was designed to harm other symbiotes, allowing him to touch Poisons without consequence, resulting in their instant death. Unbonded Poisons quickly perished, and bonded Poisons met the same fate as their hosts. The Poison Queen met her demise when Poison Jean Grey, who had the original Jean Grey still present in her mind, gained control and destroyed the Queen along with all the other Poisons, allowing her to regain her original body. In the end, only two Poisons survived: Cletus Cassidy, who would eventually return to his original form with Null's help, and Jimmy Hudson, aka Ultimate Wolverine, who would later recover his own mind. The Stalkers. In Knights of Vengeance, Venom and Vengeance joined forces to take on an intergalactic criminal group called the Stalkers. These Stalkers had been taken over by a living alien technomatter, transforming them into something far more dangerous. With the new Stalkers intent on hunting down the entire human race, Venom and Vengeance had no choice but to step in and stop them. The battle was intense, but the real challenge came from the final Stalker, who was a human named Trent. He'd absorbed all the remaining power of the alien race, making him incredibly powerful. When he faced off against Venom and Vengeance at the same time, Trent quickly gained the upper hand. In a desperate move, Venom managed to stab Trent with his own energy lance, igniting it and causing a massive explosion. Without that weapon, it was more than likely that Trent would have emerged victorious. Rune. Before he acquired the magical artifacts known as the Starstones, which effectively made him immortal, Rune was an anthropomorphic alien living in the Ultraverse. However, the Starstones did more than just grant him eternal life. They condemned him to inhabit a horrific and grotesque body. Along with this transformation came an insatiable craving for blood and the life force of others, which the Starstones required to fuel his various abilities and powers. Now, being a brutal vampiric demon from Malibu Comics who had managed to bond with an alien symbiote, Rune had become quite a terrifying killing machine that bore a striking resemblance to Venom. As a result, Venom was wrongfully blamed for Rune's brutal rampage of mass murder across Manhattan. Eventually, one day, Venom met Rune. When they clashed, Venom quickly realized he was outmatched by Rune's incredible strength, intellect, and psychic abilities. Furious at what he saw as Venom's betrayal of the symbiote race, Rune kidnapped Anne Weying to lure Venom into a trap. Their battle was intense, but things took a turn when Rune managed to rip Venom's symbiote off him and swallow it whole, granting him immense power. Just as Rune was about to kill Anne, Venom pushed him through a Stargate, banishing him to another dimension and saving her from certain death. Gargan Scorpion. MacDonald Gargan, better known as the Scorpion, is a notable supervillain in Marvel Comics, who's primarily known for being a menacing enemy of both SpiderMan and Iron Fist. Over the years, he's also been part of the Thunderbolts and eventually become the third host of the Venom symbiote. Plus, he was also the first villain to take on the Spider-Man mantle while operating as a member of the Dark Avengers. As one of our all-time favorites takes on Venom, Gargan bonded with the Clintar symbiote and took his villainy to a whole new level. As the Scorpion, he was mostly seen as a joke, ranking alongside other lesser Spider-Man villains like the Shocker and Speed Demon. However, once he became Venom, Mac transformed into a truly insane and ruthless adversary. There's always been speculation about whether the Dark Avengers might make an appearance in the MCU as morally questionable versions of Earth's mightiest heroes. We can't say for sure, but we do know that a Dark Spider-Man storyline would be absolutely thrilling. General Orwell Taylor. General Taylor was a high-ranking officer in the US Army, with connections to the Vault, which was a prison dedicated for super-powered individuals. Tragically, his son Hugh was the first officer killed accidentally by Venom during one of his escapes, which fueled Taylor's intense hatred for the symbiote. In his quest for revenge, Taylor formed a group called the Jury, which was composed of highly trained guardsmen equipped with specialized armor based on Tony Stark's designs. The Jury was armed with sonic and flame weapons, making them quite the dangerous force. After accepting a sad defeat, Orwell and the Jury later began to get away from their original goals and began working with the Life Foundation. Orwell was eventually apprehended by the authorities for his illegal dealings with the Life Foundation. Pyre. One of Venom's most powerful rogues was a young undercover journalist named Gray Russell, who eventually took on the name Pyre. Russell tried to sneak into an abandoned Hydra facility that housed a super soldier pod. Unfortunately, when Venom was taken out by the Punisher, he couldn't assist Russell on his undercover mission, which ended up going awry when the Punisher showed up looking for him. With no other options, Russell climbed into the pod, hoping for a miracle. But when he came out of it, he transformed into Pyre, gaining the power to shoot microwaves from his hands. This new ability proved to be a major threat to Venom, who had a natural weakness to heat. During their intense battle, it seemed like Pyre lost his life, leaving Venom with overwhelming guilt. He blamed the Punisher for the tragedy, but before they could confront each other, the authorities showed up and interrupted their fight, forcing them to back down, well, at least for the moment.
No, bitch!
Juggernaut. For those who were surprisingly unaware of this guy, Kane Marco, who's better known as the Juggernaut, is the stepbrother of Charles Xavier, the founder of the X-Men, and serves as the avatar for the mystical entity Cyttorak. Because of the Crimson Gem of Cyttorak, he possesses incredible strength and durability, making him a force to be reckoned with. Unfortunately, he often channels this power into criminal activities and widespread chaos. Still, the Juggernaut is widely regarded as one of the strongest beings on Earth, and is also the reason why he's one of the most undefeatable villains Marvel has. Now, when the Juggernaut was hired by Scaremore CEO Charles Evans to handle a lawsuit against his company, Beck Underwood, Venom's girlfriend, became one of the targets. While Venom stepped in to protect her and engaged in several battles with the Juggernaut, neither side could claim a clear victory. Juggernaut's incredible strength allowed him to toss Venom around like a toy, which only fueled Venom's anger, and even though Venom's counterattacks were fierce, they were no match for Juggernaut's might. Despite this, Venom's relentless determination eventually wore Juggernaut down, leading him to abandon the contract in frustration. I reacted the same way at every math test. Funny, right? Lee Price. Over the years, many heroes have donned the symbiote, each bringing their own unique power levels to the table. However, Lee Price, a small-time gangster who stole the symbiote from Flash Thompson's friend Andy Bennett, barely made a dent in that legacy. Instead of using the symbiote's powers to their full potential, Price treated it like a mind-controlling mask, trying to exert control over criminals and heroes alike. When the heroes banded together, even a massive venomized version of Price couldn't hold them back. Venom, Black Cat, Peter Parker and Flash Thompson joined forces to take him down, to give him a taste of the true power of teamwork against his weak attempts at villainy. The Jury. It's interesting to note that many of Venom's foes are actually human characters instead of symbiotes. In Venom's first comic series, Lethal Protector, Eddie Brock found himself facing off against a group of vigilantes known as the Jury. And, like I've mentioned before, the Jury was led by General Orwell Taylor, whose son had tragically been killed by Venom during a prison escape. Fueled by anger and armed with sonic weapons and fire, this group set out to bring down the symbiote. They even put SpiderMan on trial at one point before ultimately turning their sights on Venom. Despite their efforts, they were unable to succeed in their mission. Later on, Orwell Taylor started collaborating with the Life Foundation, which effectively turned the Jury into a group of lackeys. So, after parting ways with his father who was in jail, Max Taylor, who went by the name Screech, decided to reform the Jury. He wanted to create a team that mirrored the ideals of an American court of law. Max even chose to hang up his Screech costume and take on the role of the jury's defense attorney. They brought in a mysterious figure known as Gavel to serve as the judge for their trials. Olivia Lentz, a woman with a complicated past involving symbiotes, took on the role of the prosecutor. Eventually, the jury found themselves without support staff and funding, but they were later brought on by industrialist Edwin Cord, who often clashed with Iron Man. When Cord discovered that Abner Jenkins had been arrested, he aimed to capture the Thunderbolts, but the plan fell through. The Jury also received orders to stand down and not engage Graviton after he'd taken out the Redeemers. This led to an unexpected partnership between the Jury and the Thunderbolts, as they begrudgingly joined forces to take down the Secret Empire. So, that was our list of the top 25 villains who have given Venom a run for his money. With that being said, have you watched the new Venom film yet? What are your thoughts on Null as the villain for the last film in the Venom trilogy? Let us know about your thoughts and opinions in the comment box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.